Hello and welcome to the Walt Bismarck Show, starring me, Walt Bismarck, and my roommate, Walt's roommate.
Hi everybody, I am Walt's roommate.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Walt's roommate is the moderator of the excellent subreddit r/debate-alt-right. Do you want to say anything about this subreddit?
Yeah, well, I think everybody listening should come check us out. I think it's actually, if you want really just good, high-quality intellectual discussion, I think it's one of the best subreddits probably ever to exist. It is very active, so you will find good people to talk to from all around the political aisle, though certainly a strong plurality of alt-righters.
Well, I think it's really good that we have a strong platform on Reddit because, of course, r/alt-right was banned. Similar platforms have been banned in the past, and I think it's important that we're active in that community. So I think you guys are doing a great job, and yeah, I would suggest that all my subscribers go check out r/debate-alt-right.
Thanks, man.
No problem. I'd also like to advertise my new Twitter, which is going to be WAITBISMARCK. I'd really appreciate it if everybody could give me a follow, maybe promote the account a bit so we can get the follower count up and running. That would be great. So I was thinking for our first segment, we could start with a bit of a Tales of the Red Pill, kind of each contextualize our ideological journey into this thing, kind of describe how it was that we came to this movement. And why don't you go first?
So I grew up in Massachusetts, of all places, and when I was growing up, I had pretty boilerplate views for Massachusetts, which is, by the way, the only state that I know of. I'm sure there's some others, but it's the only one that I know of where even white males are reliably voting Democrat. So I was pretty far to the left. By the time that I was getting older, I was going to college and all of that stuff, I got red-pilled on women fairly quickly. It took me a little bit longer to get red-pilled on race, not even because it was necessarily beyond the pale or because it was that difficult to figure out, but because I didn't even realize I was doing this, but I spent my entire life systematically avoiding talking to non-white people.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty racist.
I know. But, okay, I didn't actually think I was racist, though. Like when I was in high school, and I went to a fairly diverse high school. It's not like I went to some all-white school where I just never came into contact with these people. But the thing is that, I would see them dressed all not like I was dressing. They would speak in their own little lingo. They would hang out with each other in these, in their little pods. And I didn't really think they were like that. I kind of thought they were doing a bit. I kind of thought somebody had just seen on TV or Googled what a El Salvadorian was supposed to act like, and they all just conformed to some stupid little mold. So I didn't think I was racist. I didn't think I was rejecting them for just being non-white. I felt like I was just going about my day talking to normal people.
Did you have any white presenting ones in your circle of friends?
I didn't have any white presenting ones. Now in middle school I went skateboarding with someone who was black. He wasn't white presenting. Now he was upper class and his parents were educated and owned their own companies. They were, little junior Clarence Thomases.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't. No, there weren't any, white presenting ones. I hung out with, honestly, in high school. I didn't hang out with this kid in high school. In high school, I hung out with just a white group of friends who I didn't think of as a white group of friends. I thought of them as a normal group of friends, and then later did some reflection and learned that they were really just the white kids in school.
Right. So you've given us your tale of the blue pill. How was it that
Nice.
How was it that you were first exposed to red pill ideologies?
Well, so the first exposure that I really had was through the manosphere, which I think is a pretty natural progression for me because I didn't really talk to any non-whites. I wasn't really in a position. It's not even that I wasn't in a position to know. It's that I wasn't really in a position to even care because in order to care, you kind of need to know.
Right. It just wasn't salient for you.
Yeah. So I was in the manosphere and I was kind of lurking around. I was reading a lot of stuff and I was pretty interested in it. I mean, it was kind of interesting to me just how coherent it was. I mean, it is actually, or at least it was a few years ago. I feel like everybody who is any good has since left and came to the alt-right. But they were very intellectually interesting and coherent and thorough.
This was when, 2013, 2014?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, I mean, the manosphere was still interesting back then.
Actually, I think it was through 2015. I mean, when Donald Trump came on the scene, and he was the master of dog whistling.
Right.
Well, when he came on, I sort of just saw in him that he was kind of the culmination of everything that I had spent the last couple of years sort of thinking about and reading about and deciding was good. I mean, his mannerisms really were quite excellent. The way that he didn't agree to take the Republican pledge, I thought was very firmly just incredible. And also just on another level, I mean, I saw he was very successful in life. He had billions and billions and billions of dollars. He had, a supermodel wife. He was just a very successful guy, and if there was any guy who probably knew something about the world that I didn't, it was probably Donald Trump. So even though at the time I was still pretty leftist in my policy prescriptions, I knew I was going to vote for him. Now, I was mostly convinced kind of by the cult of personality, but not in the small-brained way. A lot of people just thought he was funny, and therefore they were going to vote for him. It wasn't like that for me. In him, I kind of saw I sort of saw the philosophy that I'd spent 2 years thinking about, and I sort of saw it being practiced, and I kind of saw a lifelong success with it. And it just kind of seemed like whatever he was saying, it was the natural continuation of what I was saying at the time.
So what proportion of the manosphere got behind Donald Trump, immediately? Was it pretty much everybody, or were there any, holdouts?
Well, there were plenty of holdouts. I mean, if you look at places, I mean, I was on, I still kind of check Are the Red Pill, not in a serious way like I used to.
Right.
But I still kind of check it, and they're, all Indians. So I'm pretty sure that all the white ones came to the Red Pill or became sympathetic towards him.
Right.
The only real holdouts were either non-white or MGTOWs.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think Donald Trump probably must have had the effect of sort of bifurcating the Manospherian community between people who could take the sort of philosophy of power relations, the philosophy of not cucking and agreeing and amplifying and, maintaining frame and all of that, and taking that to a productive place of building civilization. And sort of left behind the sort of Indian American men, other non-whites who just wanted to bang white women and were, frustrated they wouldn't sleep with them, and then, as well as the MGTOWs and, the hardcore PUAs who all they're really looking for is tail, and they're not interested in building any sort of productive society.
Yeah, on the Red Pill or on the Manosphere, there's always been this really small-brained proportion of the population who they are really just thinking about their dicks, and, they read the sidebar and whatever, which is probably, if you're sufficiently motivated, enough to, meet a woman.
Right.
But they're thinking about it, really when they log on there, they just want someone to, feed them a really witty text to send to a girl. They're not really doing anything big-brained.
Right.
But if you're one of the big-brained people there, if you're one of the interesting people there, then I feel like it kind of behooves you to see in Donald Trump, this is... I mean, I don't know, on the alt-right, I understand that we kind of see him slightly differently, because we have an eye specifically out for how he cucks, or how he, is a little bit too Israeli, or whatever. Right. But, I mean, you do have to put all of this into context of his boomerism and all of that, and we do also have to understand that while we aren't necessarily seeing it, because we're who we are, to the normie, he's pretty fucking far to the right.
Right.
and not even so much far to the right, which he is, but he's far to the white.
Right.
But so I was following him for a long time, and that kind of just put me in contact with people who were farther right than I was. I mean, at the time that was actually everybody following Donald Trump.
Right.
But not just the ones who were into guns, and some people are single issue voters. They vote for Donald Trump purely because he'll give them a gun. Mm-hmm. But it also put me into contact with the alt-right. I started checking out their memes. I started checking out the jokes. And I was interested in the culture actually way before I had accepted the premise of race realism. Mm-hmm. And there is, and I kind of regret this, because I want to tell people that I'm just so big-brained that I heard the arguments and they made and they made sense to me. But it actually wasn't like that. I heard the arguments, and they kind of had no effect on me, because I knew that I knew so little about the subject matter.
Right.
That, I knew that even if somebody had a flawed argument, I would probably not actually be in a place to refute it. So it kind of pulled me over when I was a little bit skeptical, and skeptical of the actual fact premises, was just the culture. I kind of wanted to be a part of it. I kind of wanted to follow this and have it be more than just a guilty pleasure.
Right. I think a lot of the people who sort of came into the movement in 2015, 2016, they followed that same intellectual journey. They weren't so much convinced by arguments. They just were really drawn into the infectious culture and all the memes and the great community that we had. It was really just this explosive cultural renaissance going on.
Well, I think that there's something just very human about that. I mean, I don't know. This is going to sound, I think, very strange, but in my opinion, I think that anybody who's actually, I'm very suspicious of anybody who's actually convinced by arguments and facts and reasoning of a position that didn't closely resemble the position that they held before ever hearing those facts and arguments and reason.
I don't think anyone is actually convinced by arguments. I think what happens is that there's sort of fundamental aesthetics and sort of basal moral presuppositions just slowly, gradually change over time. Usually in alignment with their social circle, and maybe that happens as a consequence of arguments, but like one argument never actually convinces somebody. It's more just like...
I do agree with that to a large extent. I think that a lot of the reason why arguments, to the extent that they have any power at all, they have that power because they demonstrate social proof over the people who get BTFO'd by that argument. Mm-hmm. I don't actually think it's like somebody just hears those facts and how it's connected with reason and they suddenly do anything. I think that what happens is that, people feel very silly when they go against facts, or people, see their champion get, just absolutely BTFO'd, any of that sort of thing. That's what I think really pulls people over.
Right. So you could say that logos only has persuasive power to the extent that it appeals to ethos.
Yeah, and even then I would say it's 100% the ethos and 0% the logos. And 0% whatever the third one was.
Right. Oh, pathos?
What was pathos again?
Like emotion.
Oh...
Like ethos is like authority and social
women.
Yeah, well, but no, yeah. At the end of the day, what it comes down to is what is it that you value on a fundamental level, and arguments, they can change that gradually over time, but nobody's ever going to be persuaded because of one individual argument.
Well, I think everybody values the same thing on a fundamental level, and I think that the thing that we all value is wanting to be on the side of the cool guy.
Yeah, that's true. That's it. But some people are more willing to be dissidents than others. Some people are more willing to sort of be intellectual pioneers. Like, take someone like Jared Taylor. He was doing this way before it was cool. And he was doing it when
No, he started doing it at exactly the moment it became cool.
Because it became cool once he started doing it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's fair. But my point was there is a certain class of person who is capable of accepting a position when it has no social acceptability, no social acceptance whatsoever in the broader community, who is purely capable of being convinced by arguments and reasoning and all that. But that's a very rare person, and even in that case, they still have their own moral and aesthetic and emotional reasons for embracing the position.
I also feel like to some large extent that person is actually just motivated by wanting to be a contrarian.
I don't think Jared Taylor's like that. I think some people just have this unwillingness to bend in accordance with social pressure, and I think that's what you see in Taylor. You do have a lot of people who just naturally like to be contrarians. I think Spencer's one of them. And nothing against those people. I have some of those tendencies myself. But I guess my main point here is that an argument is usually only useful to the extent that it can convince somebody that a policy is in line with their emotional sort of objectives for the world, or their particular aesthetic, or what have you. Or the argument can help establish social authority, or a sense of community that they desire to be a part of. Usually an argument in and of itself, I mean, people just don't... ultimately, you can't derive an ought from an is, and you can't negotiate desire, so you're sort of operating within the framework of what they want and what they like, and sure, arguments can change that over time, but...
I think you're largely operating within a paradigm of I forgot which one of Newton's laws this is. I bet you know. Where an object in motion stays in motion.
Oh, it's the first law.
Oh. Well, I feel like people's ideologies work the same way, where you're just fundamentally not going to change those first premises. There's no rational way to do it other than, I mean, maybe if it's like a traumatic experience or something, I don't know,
Yeah.
but all you can really do is try and present your views as more in line with who this person sort of fundamentally is.
Right.
And one of the things that I think goes wrong with a lot of people, like Jeb Bush types in particular, is that they kind of misdiagnose who people are. They look at data about where people are right now, and they don't interpret that in terms of why might a person say that they are like this, or what would compel a person to vote this way, or whatever data you would use. I mean, you do just have to have that just fundamental view of what human beings are like, and you have to go on it, and you have to be right.
In my personal experience, the best way to sort of convert somebody is to identify their own personal Overton window and sort of push on the hard right of that Overton window, not just by sort of modifying your own arguments, but also by, exposing them to transitional figures who occupy that ideological realm. And gradually, over time, their preconceptions will shift, their aesthetics will shift, and they will eventually come to the position. It just takes longer for some people than others.
But so, that's enough about my red pill story. Tell me, how did Walt Bismarck become Walt Bismarck?
Well, my intellectual journey here was a lot longer and more gradual than yours. I guess, well, I grew up in a very sort of generically neoliberal of a middle class household. I guess my parents always taught me to be tolerant and, welcome diversity. I remember my mom one time made us celebrate Hanukkah. One time we celebrated Kwanzaa. We dressed up in those stupid moo-moos. Yeah, kind of cringe. But when I was around 11, I became a communist, and I was reading a lot of hard left literature, an anarcho-communist to be specific. I was reading a lot of Chomsky, a lot of what's his name, Bakunin, a lot of those types of people. Really into the hard left for a while. Interestingly enough, though, I wasn't an Antifa type, and I was very anti-Israel. I was actually sort of woke on the JQ to the extent that I was very anti-circumcision, very anti-Israel. I was admittedly kind of a pause anti-Israel because it was pro-Palestinian.
Can you actually explain to me, how does anarcho-communism work? Like, how can you force everybody to like put their thing into a giant central pile? And
Oh no, that's not really the idea. Have you ever seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
Obviously.
So you know that scene where they go through the peasant village and it's like, it's a problem inherent in the system. We're an anarcho-syndicalist commune. Blah blah blah. You remember that?
Yeah.
So that's basically the idea. The idea is like you have like these little decentralized communities and they rule themselves through like this community thing, and they'll equally distribute all their resources and just have this egalitarian little utopia.
How many people are you supposed to know?
Probably depends on the thinker, but a lot of people want to keep it under Dunbar's number.
Okay.
So, it should be, for those of you who don't know, Dunbar's number is the number of people you can psychologically conceive of as like being human and sort of differentiate. So the idea is they would be a more like sort of organic, natural.
That number is like what, like 7, 8?
150.
Jesus.
Yeah, so you'd have like a little
social.
Yeah.
Apparently,
So,
I thought I was like a social butterfly.
yeah, I thought so too. Certainly compared to me. But yeah, so the general idea is like you'd have these small decentralized communities sort of ruling themselves in this egalitarian way. I was really into that until I was like 12, 13. Then I went through this sort of like generically big brain centrist like dictatorship. I was reading Plato's Republic, and I thought
that brought you to centrism?
So I feel like Plato would be okay in terms of the modern political compass. He'd obviously be very authoritarian, but I think like he wouldn't really affiliate with either the hard left or the hard right.
Yeah, because neither one of them is authoritarian enough for him. Except maybe the hard left.
Maybe. No, I don't think so. No, I supported like this sort of generically like culturally centrist, economically centrist dictatorship of like big brains, because I was like very, I don't know, when I was 12, 13, I was very kind of I am very smart tier. So,
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I was into that for like a year, and then when I was around 13, then I got into libertarianism, and I remained a libertarian for a good 6-7 years. Though what kind of libertarian I was definitely oscillated. I was into left libertarianism for a long period of that, probably more in the early stages. And then as Ron Paul sort of entered into the public consciousness, especially especially after I wasn't really into Ron Paul 2008. I was really into Ron Paul 2012. And I really got into right libertarianism as a consequence of that. I read a lot of the Mises Institute
So
literature.
Can you actually explain to me? I don't actually understand what a left libertarian is.
Oh, sure. So a lot of them still purport to believe in, I guess, voluntarism, but they just want it to be egalitarian in nature. You have a lot of the people, kind of similar to anarcho-communism, who just like the sort of small-scale, decentralized communities kind of ruling themselves in this egalitarian, sort of culturally left-wing way. These are the people who oftentimes will say things like, "Oh, capitalism is work for a boss or starve, man," or property is theft. It is a very common slogan of these people.
The best that I've ever made it out to be is that, I mean, leftism is the dominant hegemony in our society, and I know this isn't a very charitable version,
Right.
but leftism is the dominant hegemony in our society, so a lot of people start, just your stupid ass normie,
Right.
starts being a leftist inherently. And I've always kind of thought leftist libertarianism just kind of meant that, like, you could just have such a strong hegemony that people, even without a state, would just be progressives and would just like hate white people.
I mean, kind of. No, it's not really about hating white. But see, like, that's the thing. Like, the old left wasn't about hating white people. Before a certain ethnic group kind of took control of things, leftism was just authentically egalitarian and all about, like the working class owning the means of production and things like that. So to not belabor the point, I was a left libertarian for a while. Then I got into right libertarianism through Ron Paul. I read a lot of the Mises Institute literature. I became an expert on anarcho-capitalism and arguing for private roads and private defense agencies and all that jazz on 4chan. I spent so much intellectual energy on that, and like I don't even remember any of it. I spent so much time arguing about praxeology and human nature and all of this, and I don't know.
Praxeology is autistic and retarded, but I feel like if you don't know and understand it, you are missing out on a very key part of the world.
Sure, it's good, but it's so like this a prioristic reasoning has no place in economics. I mean, okay, I wouldn't say it has no place, but the extent to which they sort of, I don't know, it's very like cultish and weird.
Yeah, it's kind of like the cult in assuming that people will do what they would do if they were not only low time preference, but also like really valued money.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. Well, basically, you're assuming everybody is like a 120 IQ, mildly autistic white guy. And that's sort of how I thought of the world for a long time as a right libertarian. And it was when that assumption began breaking down. We were talking about arguments and everything earlier. It was when I guess it wasn't so much arguments. It was just a lot of empirical observations that's not the case, that I slowly, gradually started rejecting libertarianism. But anyway, yeah, I stayed a libertarian for about 6 years. College definitely pushed me to the right culturally. I entered college, I guess, being sort of, I was generically, I was somewhat right-wing economically, but culturally I was pretty much a centrist. And then, through Ron Paul, the Mises Institute, I became a right libertarian.
I only ever got affiliated with that movement after all the good ones left.
Right.
Assuming there ever were good ones. I feel
no, there
like
were plenty of good ones.
No, I feel like there were ones who became good after they left.
No, there were plenty of good ones, because you have to understand, libertarianism was for many people a proxy for white identity. It was a way that they could safely... look, the central tenet of libertarianism, at least right libertarianism, was sort of get off my back, leave me alone. And when you're operating as a white person, as a masculine, normal, heterosexual white male in this pause society, libertarianism is the avenue for you to say, okay, like, fuck off, I want to be a good civilized person over here, and all of you degenerates can do your thing over there, and I'll just, just leave me alone.
That is actually one thing I've noticed. Libertarians, in my opinion, never actually want... I mean, okay, technically they want liberty, they'll write it down, their philosophy is, it's consistent with liberty and all that, but none of them ever actually want to do things that you could only do if you have an extraordinary amount of liberty. Right. The things that they all want to do are like extremely normal things that any normal society, or any society period, should be more than comfortable doing. They want to be... They use liberty as, like, a shield against liberty.
Right, yeah. I mean, right libertarians, I'm pretty convinced that they would be perfectly happy just living in a normal ethno-state. I think they do just fine. Left libertarians, a lot of them are drug addicts, and the rest of them are pedophiles, in my experience.
As if those are mutually exclusive groups. Or as if those are groups that don't take up all of left libertarianism.
True. Well, that's why I actually
left. That's like the essence of left libertarianism.
Yeah. Well, that's why I kind of got out of that scene and into right libertarianism.
Because you don't want to do that anymore.
No, look. Okay, I was 15 years old. I'll modify my previous statement. There are 3 types of left libertarians. There are drug addicts, there are pedophiles, and there are 15-year-olds. And I was firmly in that latter camp. And when I started realizing that most of the movement was comprised of the first 2 groups, that's when I had headed for the hills and towards right libertarianism.
No, like I could definitely see being 15 and not understanding that the whole thing is just like a giant pedophile thing.
Well, there was that guy. What was his name? He ran some like famous libertarian site, and then he got in trouble because he turned in his laptop to like a Best Buy for them to fix it, and they found a bunch of child porn on it, and then he freaked out and went to McDonald's and like basically uploaded this post to Facebook saying he was going to wait there for the police to come get him, that he had a bunch of CP on his computer, and that he had been molesting his daughter for the past 20 years. Brad Spangler, that was his name. But like left libertarians, they're always there was also Mary Ruwart. She was a candidate for the Libertarian Party nomination in I think 2012, maybe 2008. No, it was 2012. She was also like one of these like pedo apologists. It's like it's very creepy how many left libertarians are into this.
There's a subreddit called R Anarchism where a lot of them identify.
Isn't that like
as
that's the commies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of them identify as libertarian socialists, which I just see as kind of a lamer version of anarcho-communists.
Yeah, I mean all those different designations.
But they have like this rule that they enforce very strictly, and they have it listed in their rules, and you can they don't list their rules, but you can see in their reasons to report somebody.
Right.
And it's like pedophile apologia.
Of course.
And I mean,
fine, like what kind of community needs a rule against that?
I was gonna say that. I mean, fine, props to the mods for banning pedophilia, but the fact that they need a rule against that is a pretty big damnation of their own community.
Yeah.
Like
that's embarrassing.
On the subreddit I moderate, our debate alt right, I would ban somebody if they were apologizing for pedophilia, but I don't write it in the rules, and I've never had to ban anybody for that.
Right.
Like, it's just not something I thought about until literally this moment right now.
Right. So yeah, left libertarians, degenerates, we can pretty strongly write them off. But no, there were a lot of great people in libertarianism. Like I said, it was sort of a proxy for white identity. There were, of course, the Ron Paul newsletters, who I think were written by Lou Rockwell. And Rockwell was, of course, the intellectual anchor of the Ron Paul movement. And I'm pretty sure he's a closet white nationalist. If not a closet white nationalist, he was definitely the driving force with Murray Rothbard of paleo-libertarianism, and that was a sort of potential alliance between like soft white nationalists and libertarians back in the late 90s. That sort of got revived with Ron Paul 2012, but after Ron Paul lost the Iowa caucuses in 2012, I think a lot of the young people who supported him sort of started to intellectually migrate out of libertarianism. I was, of course, one of these people. I got really into a lot of different scenes for a while. I was sort of intellectually homeless after... I was still a libertarian, but the movement was like very rapidly dying. You had people like Kathy Riesenwitz, taking control, thirst-trapping Jeffrey Tucker, who used to be a very solid far-right sort of guy who would be, an apologist for the Confederates, who I think was pretty racially aware, but then... Yeah, after people like Riesenwitz got her claws in him, he totally cucked out, and he became a total degenerate left libertarian. And yeah, like there wasn't anything attractive about libertarianism anymore after Ron Paul lost in 2012. It became, a lot of money got into it, but the money was never really productively spent. You had a lot of people getting into these like DC think tanks and, like getting ingratiated in that culture, but they really like lost their souls, and I don't know, like the movement as a whole was just like spiraling into death, and all the high quality people were looking for other avenues to explore. And a lot of things presented themselves. There was, of course, the manosphere. I never really got into the manosphere too heavily. I was exposed to a few like blogs, but they never interested me too much. I got really into NRX for about a year, or at least what was NRX back then, and I don't know, 2012, 2013, 2014.
Did you have an Asian girlfriend during that year?
I did not have an Asian girlfriend, no. So I guess I was never properly NRX, but I did read a little bit of Moldbug. There was that guy Davis Arini. I watched a lot of his videos on YouTube. Oh, I guess I should say around this time, 2011, 2012, 2013, I started watching Ryan Fox videos on race and IQ and hereditarianism. And that really red pilled me. I guess it gave me the arguments to believe in race realism. And I totally accepted that, blacks and whites were intellectually distinct and all that, but I wasn't really it didn't like sell me on white nationalism or anything. It made me look at the world through a paradigm of the races having different average IQs, but I didn't derive from that. I based my position on that was like, okay, these differences exist, but there should be no policy prescriptions derived from them at all. And then gradually I sort of came to believe, okay, we shouldn't have racial discrimination against whites. I mean, I guess I'd always really believed that, but I sort of believed that more aggressively. I sort of started really aggressively signaling against affirmative action in a sort of consciously white identitarian manner as opposed to just a generically libertarian manner. What else? I was watching a little bit of Jared Taylor, a little bit of Ramsey Paul, 2011, 2012. So I was getting exposed to like white identity, but very not a, like aggressive white nationalism or anything. Just like these are some policies that could concretely help white people in the short term, and I was in favor of those, but nothing really systematic or broad or meaningful. So I did NRX for about a year. I got really into Hans Hermann Hoppe because I was still, I guess, sort of an anarcho-capitalist at the time. I got into that whole argumentation ethics thing. But the thing about Hoppe is his system of anarcho-capitalism sort of provides a framework by which you can have voluntary discrimination through, what are they called? Restrictive covenants is what they're called. I referenced that in my Aladdin parody. Restrictive covenants, basically the idea is like a neighborhood forms like a contract, like a group contract that nobody's allowed to sell their house to a non-white or something like that. Also, the Hoppian framework provides for, extreme traditionalism in, cultural norms. It was very good as like a sort of transitional force between libertarianism and, I guess the dissident right, or I guess the hard right. And of course, I got into like the Pinochet memes with the helicopters and everything like that. I think the whole Pinochet thing is just an excuse to. It's again like sort of a proxy for white identity by signaling really hard against communists and by wanting to physically remove communists or whatever. I think it's a way for people to sort of channel their aggression without like really doing anything seriously dangerous. Because the whole Pinochet thing, I mean, maybe you'll get like Antifa people signaling against it, but like basic bitch Republicans won't really even care that much. Not like they will if you're a white nationalist or something. So I got into that whole thing for a while. So around 2013, 2014, I was posting a lot on 4chan, on Poll, or New, maybe it was back then. I was on 4chan this whole time, gradually being exposed to WN memes. The Trayvon Martin thing happened, the Mike Brown thing happened. That made me very racially aware. I remember the George Zimmerman trial. That was huge for my sort of cultural move to the hard right. The memes created during that period, it was like a little mini alt-right renaissance 2 years before the real thing happened. So around this time, the Right Stuff blog started, and I was a reader of that, I think, since more or less the very beginning. I probably started reading it a few weeks after it opened, and then after the Ferguson riots began, I started listening to The Daily Shoah, and I've been listening to it pretty religiously ever since. So, yeah, I was definitely one of the people. I've been part of this thing since before it was this thing. I was with the same group of people. I was with, that same group of people who moved through libertarianism into the NRX scene, into Hoppianism, into the whole Pinochet memes scene, and then finally into what became the alt-right. And I remember it really crystallized in 2015 when the cuckservative meme really exploded on Twitter. That was like the first thing of the alt-right really. I remember it was right after the Supreme Court federalized gay marriage. And people were feeling really black-pilled and low about that. It was also right after the Dylan Roof thing, where all the Confederate flags were being taken down. So we were feeling really black-pilled and low. But then this cuckservative meme exploded on Twitter, and it really got the alt-right going. And the enthusiasm was tremendous. And Trump had, of course, announced his candidacy. There were all these factors just getting everybody on Twitter, getting everybody excited, and Twitter was so unregulated back then. I remember I very quickly amassed a few thousand followers there, and then I started my YouTube channel. I started making all the Disney parodies. People seemed very enthusiastic about it, and yeah, I think it was sometime in late 2015 that I first called myself a white nationalist. I had called myself alt-right before that. I had definitely called myself pro-white. I was thinking of the world in a racial way, a racial paradigm, probably well before that, Probably I was a de facto white nationalist, maybe as early as 2013, but I definitely embraced the label. I embraced the ideology very wholeheartedly in 2015. So yeah, that's my Red Pill story.
All right, and I think everybody is also wondering the big question here: how does Disney fall into that?
Well, I personally I grew up in kind of a Disney family. You know, we would go to the parks probably once or twice a year. So I guess it just has. You know, I was kind of one of those kids who Disney got their claws into at a really young age. And I think a lot of millennials are like that. I mean, the '90s, you had this kind of Disney renaissance going on. So all these great movies coming out, a lot of people got kind of.
I'm not 100% sure on this. Disney Renaissance, that's a formal term, right? That's not
Yeah.
like that's actually a thing.
Yeah.
Can you define it for me?
Sure. It starts with The Little Mermaid and ends with I don't know, Hercules or Mulan or something like that. Just there were all the movies Disney made in the '90s where the production quality like greatly increased. Where just generally speaking, they had much higher critical reception, much better commercial reception. It was just a period of extreme growth and expansion for Disney, and very a lot of artistic success. Well, anyway, so I was one of those kids who Disney got their claws into. So Disney always had a certain emotional currency with me, and I think for a lot of millennials, it's kind of the same thing. I think a lot of us think back to Disney as sort of representative of the '90s and early 2000s. You know, it was a simpler time, a more peaceful time. You know, and it was a time when the country was still like 85% white. So, you know, it still kind of harkens back to that. But anyway, I was inspired to do the parodies because Gamergate actually came out with their own sequence of Disney parodies when that was going on. It was called V the Musical. And these parodies had very high production value, but in terms of satirical content, they weren't that good. But what they did really illustrate to me is that a lot of the Disney songs had great potential for parodies and could be reappropriated in a sort of white nationalist context to discuss our issues. And like for instance, On the Open Road, that is so easily a song about you know the typical representative members of the Republican Party sort of cucking out, and you know a young man in the party being frustrated with them. So there's so many scenarios that could be easily appropriated for our purposes. I was planning on doing it for quite some time actually. But you know I was flirting with the idea for 6 or 7 months, but it really wasn't until the whole conservative meme kind of crystallized and I started to amass a Twitter following, and I started to think, well, I could have a platform to put this out and get a pretty good reception. So I decided to do it, and it really quickly took off, and yeah, people responded well to it.
So Disney nowadays, I mean, everything, I'm sort of thinking more modern era stuff, Frozen, Tangled, is Moana.
Yeah.
Is that stuff all just absolutely terrible, or do you see the best in it?
Okay, well, they have their ups and downs, so let's kind of go through them one by one. So Frozen, that's probably the most famous one. It's most emblematic of the modern Disney era. It's funny, they actually refer to the most recent Disney movies, I think starting with Princess and the Frog and then going up to Moana. They refer to them as...
Hold on, I want to cut you off a little bit there. They started off with Princess and the Frog.
Yeah.
So a few points on that by itself. I mean, the animation of that. Now, I haven't seen the movie. I only saw your parody, which for everyone who doesn't know, because I didn't know until he told me, was Friends on the Alt-Right, I think it was called.
Yeah. Friends on the Alt-Right.
So number one, that's not even the same kind of animation. It's really just the one that stars a black chick.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, a lot of people praise the return to traditional 2D animation.
Well, okay, but it wasn't really a return. It was like a brief revisiting before we never go back there again.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, you know, liberals like to say, you know, the line for XYZ is arbitrary. And the line for Disney eras is a little bit arbitrary, so I kind of feel like Disney just chose that one to be like, hey guys, the black chick started it off for us. Yeah. Even though Princess and the Frog clearly has less than nothing to do with Frozen.
Right, well, it's funny, if you look at like merchandise, I mean, if you go to the Disney store, you'll see that they always have a bunch of the Tiana dolls in stock, because little girls don't really want them. They want to buy the Elsa dolls, the Anna dolls, the Rapunzel dolls. Nobody's really interested in buying the Tiana dolls. Or if you even go to the parks...
I would bet that not even the black girls want the Tiana dolls.
Probably not, but in any case, Princess and the Frog is commonly held to be the beginning of the new Disney Renaissance, it is sometimes called, which followed the second Disney Dark Age of the 2000s, when DreamWorks was the more dominant studio.
Right, I don't remember anything coming out in those years.
Yeah, there was like Chicken Little. Did you ever see that?
I didn't even know until you said it 2 seconds ago that.
Yeah, there was that shitty like. There was a. Did you ever see?
Was that asshole who thought the sky was falling?
Yeah. Yeah, there was that 3D movie. But then there was Emperor's New Groove, but that was almost just.
Oh, I actually liked Emperor's New Groove.
I love Emperor's New Groove, but it's like sort of towards the end of the Disney Renaissance, and it's one of those gray areas.
It's also not epic. It's funny. The characters are charming, and it has some good lines.
It's
and
like
all
a
that,
buddy
but-
comedy road trip movie, so it's like.
Yeah, but like it's not like, I don't know. When I was watching The Lion King, I actually did feel like I was watching something like culturally important.
Right.
Even with something lame like Pocahontas, which we should talk about later.
Yeah.
But even though I didn't enjoy the movie, and I suspected nobody else would either, I at least understood that I was watching something that they sunk bajillions of dollars into, and that it was supposed to be a big cultural landmark, and in a way it was, just not in the way they intended to. I mean, it actually does say a lot about how we thought about race at the time.
Right, exactly. But a movie like, I don't know, Brother Bear, a movie like Chicken Little, like none of these...
Like all this shit I didn't even watch.
Yeah, none of these were culturally significant. So it was Princess and the Frog that really signified Disney kind of coming back into being important, I guess. Well, one could, of course, debate that. But then it was after that Tangled was very successful. And then Frozen, of course, blew up at the box office. It made Disney very relevant to the popular consciousness again. And then Moana came out a little bit later. So I would say of these movies... we'll look at them one by one. So
I'll start with Frozen, because Frozen is interesting in the sense that it was simultaneously the best and the worst thing ever to come out of Disney.
Right. So it was the best in the sense that, okay, so I think we can look at Frozen in two respects. On a purely aesthetic level, it has a lot of really beautiful, like, Nordic architecture and nature, the way the snow is animated,
It's
everything
visually
like that.
stunning.
Visually stunning. The music is great. If you just look at it as a musical, I mean, it has a few shitty songs like Fix Her Upper, but like nobody thinks about that.
It's a Disney parodist's dream.
Right. Well, sure. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Let It Go, Do You Want to Build a Snowman, Love is an Open Door. I mean, all of these are tremendous songs. From a musical perspective, it's great. But from a thematic narrative perspective, it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. The plot makes no sense. It's very incoherent and weird. And the entire second act of the movie, like pretty much everything after Let It Go, it just deteriorates from there. And I think most people just kind of tune out after that point because, it's kind of funny. In the original version of the plot, Elsa was the villain of the story. And she was supposed to be the primary antagonist, but they ended up changing it to Hans after everyone liked Let It Go so much. They thought Idina Menzel's performance was so charismatic, so it ended up being Hans as the villain, and it felt very forced. It felt very...
Yeah, there was nothing about him that would make you think he was the villain, and I once said that on Reddit, and there was, some extremely autistic guy trying to show me how smart he was, where he was pointing out that... something like when they were singing their song, he was like, find my own place and looking out to the kingdom, showing he was going to take it over. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, I Googled that and I saw that, like, no, it was rewritten around the song Let It Go.
Right.
And so, like, no, whatever they thought they were seeing was not there. They were retconning that in after the place, probably because they liked the movie and just wanted it to make sense enough to just, like, make a story up about it.
There was no real foreshadowing of him being a villain. And
he gave away blankets.
Yeah, he gave away blankets to the people who were starving and cold due to the blizzard that Elsa inflicted. I mean,
not only that, but that didn't contribute to the plot in any actual way other than to show him as the nice guy.
Yeah.
I feel like in the editing room, unless they had a minimum timestamp they had to go by, I feel like they could have at least just taken that scene out.
Right, exactly. And also, he was the one who he defeated that giant snow demon that Elsa, the big snowman that Elsa summoned. He was just behaving in a straightforwardly heroic manner the entire movie, and by everything we see, he looks like he would be a much more competent ruler of Arendelle than Elsa would be. So, from a thematic standpoint, a lot of MRAs also will criticize the ending where it's like sisterly love instead of romantic love, and I sort of agree with that, but it's been done to death, and I don't know, I don't care that much about that.
Well, I kind of want to hear the argument for how it's kind of evil that Hans never really got the opportunity to cuck Kristoff.
Yeah, that would have been good.
I mean, I do think that really set things up. That number one, something very bad should have happened to Elsa at the end. It should have been presented tragically. I mean, I get it. She was a victim of her unexplained ice powers, but Kristoff should have been punished for the fact that he I don't know,
He's like a
man.
beta.
He didn't really have that Hercules spirit to him.
No, I mean, so what they did is they made him very like sort of superficially masculine, but he had no leadership qualities whatsoever.
Was he
like Hans did.
superficially masculine?
Well, he was like big and muscular because he like chopped ice all day. But I mean,
That's true.
but in terms of his, I mean, he kind of, I don't know, like he wasn't really leading anything. He was kind of just following Anna around, doing her bit. He didn't have like this independent spirit to like fulfill his own goals other than like wanting to.
He wasn't actually in that story for like any reason other than because Anna was paying him.
And at the end, he's taking her back to get kissed by Hans.
By another dude.
Like, what the fuck?
And then, sure,
What a
she
pussy.
technically was dating him at the end, but... I mean, sure, she was dating him, but it was pretty implied that it was like some stupid high school relationship that would probably end before the second movie comes out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I bet they're not even going to be dating at the beginning of the second movie.
Yeah, it would have been really good if Hans pulled a Richard Spencer on him.
Yeah. But oh, shit. All right, well, moving on. Let's talk about Tangled. I think Tangled is sort of the opposite of Frozen. The music is horrible. It's not good at all. I don't think there's not a single memorable song from that entire movie.
I literally don't remember any songs from that movie.
Yeah. The art is very nice. The aesthetics are generally very bright and happy and European and good. In terms of the story, I liked it. I think that Flynn Rider was probably one of the first like authentically masculine male protagonists in a Disney film since maybe like Prince Eric.
I think the story has been stronger than... Okay, to be fair, I didn't see The Princess and the Frog, obviously. But
Right.
The story was stronger than Frozen, and it was stronger than Moana. But I think that... Like, I don't know, when I was watching the first movies from the first Disney Renaissance, when I was watching, Hercules or Hunchback of Notre Dame, or especially Lion King, I kind of felt like Disney was trying to be much larger than life in a way. Obviously, in The Lion King, I mean, they sort of go very deep into who you are and how important, Simba and virtue and all of that is. But even in ones like Pocahontas, and, we'll talk later about whether that succeeded or failed, they were trying to sort of be very big and very deep. But with this kind of new Disney Renaissance, I don't actually know if, Frozen or Tangled or whatever... Look, these are stories about, like, some randomly selected girl who happened, I guess, to be important by her birthright, but, they do kind of shit a little bit on the princess dynamic. I mean, certainly they're less princessy than Cinderella.
Mm-hmm.
Was she a princess?
Yeah.
Okay.
She became one.
Okay, okay. But so, I do kind of feel like, they go on some happy...
It's like Meghan Markle.
They do kind of go on some happy, cozy adventure, but... I don't know. I don't actually care all that much if Rapunzel, finds her parents.
Yeah.
I don't... And they didn't even gas up the royalty or anything. There's, nothing she wanted to do with them. She found her parents. I don't actually care if Elsa and Anna, find sisterly love. And I don't care about anything Moana did.
Yeah.
Just period. I mean...
Yeah, it's hard to. Well, there's multiple dynamics to that end, but
I actually think there's only one dynamic to that end, and that's that the authors hadn't really thought very hard about the story. I mean, this whole time she's asking this question of who am I? Why me? What makes me special? And it's a little bit reminiscent of The Lion King and that sort of, Simba, remember who you are type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Except they never come up with a convincing answer. I mean, she goes to go fight the volcano demon at the end. And the best connection we can come up with for what's so special about her, is that she happens to look like the volcano demon.
I mean, I'm sure all women on that island look like the volcano demon, so I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know to what extent that's even. But Moana, I have mixed feelings. I really like the way they animated the water, and I do like the rock song. But I guess those are my main points of the movie that I like. Other than that, it kind of sucks.
Well, okay, in terms of animation, I see that as actually really depressing that that's one of the selling points, because animation gets superseded by technology every few years. I mean,
right.
Remember how big a deal it was. What was that movie? Avatar? The one where they go to the distant planet?
With the blue aliens and shit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was at one point. I think it's still the highest grossing film and everything, and its whole big selling point was how technologically masterful it was, and the animation and the 3D and see it in IMAX.
Right.
Whereas now it has literally nothing to offer the audience. There's no reason to go pick that up other than maybe... I mean, I could see it as maybe an archaeological archaeologically important film, to just show everybody how bad technology was, or show everybody in 40 years, or maybe in 40 years show us how little we've progressed since then.
Well, people can still like appreciate big achievements for their time. Like we can like look at Alfred Hitchcock movies and say, oh, this was an interesting innovation of cinematography.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that, but I mean just in terms of enjoying it as a movie, just a very normie enjoyment of it. It's kind of like how the first Star Wars film was originally like the greatest special effects thing imaginable, and now it's a little bit goofy in terms of that, but it holds up because we actually do like its story. But just enjoying it as a movie, you can't really enjoy Avatar. It just doesn't really work.
Yeah, see, that's the nice thing about 2D animation is that, I don't know, if you look at Beauty and the Beast or Lion King, it doesn't really look dated.
Yeah, I think that it kind of has that same... Like in the same way that chess, despite being like 1,000 years old, it can never be made obsolete by having poor graphics, because all you really want is to make sure that the queen looks like a queen and the rook looks like a rook. I mean, it sort of hits a top level where above that you don't get any more progress. Whereas in a film like Frozen, the animation masterpiece of it is kind of what makes it special. And yes, they can re-mimic that in Moana, but the film surrounding it is kind of terrible.
Yeah, that's true. Do you remember how great like Shrek looked when you were like a kid, and then like now you watch the original Shrek and it's like, holy shit, this is terrible. This is like
I actually don't even remember. Like, I know that I saw Shrek in theaters when it came out, but I don't actually remember the experience. I just know that I've seen it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but yeah, if you go watch like the original Shrek nowadays, Shrek 2 looks a bit better, but the original Shrek, it looks horrible. It looks like one of those like video games from the 90s with really blocky graphics, and everything is just, it's a very unimpressive experience.
So I think that there is a certain dynamic where if it's the case that you walk out of a movie and what you get from it, what you have to tell everybody about it is like the animation is great, really all you're telling them is like, look, this was made by a big enough company to have a budget, and it came out recently.
Right. I feel like Disney's films in the 90s will forever be appreciated as strong works of art that are, like, regardless of the time and place, are culturally significant. They just speak to something important in the human soul. Whereas Tangled, Frozen, and Moana, they're technologically very impressive, but
But they're corporate sanitized nonsense with professionally made music and spectacular animation for the year they came out.
I mean, and they make a lot of money with little girls playing Let It Go on YouTube and monetizing that, and they make a lot of money selling the merchandise. And,
but it is immediate cash at the cost of the Disney brand.
Exactly. In terms of long-term brand building, it is a liability, I would argue. I think that is because of all of their cultural achievements in the 90s that Disney was able to maintain their brand through at kind of a shitty time in the early 2000s, and if they're not going to invest in that again, then in the long term they are going to decline.
There are also cultural and demographic factors at play. If you compare, for instance, Moana to Pocahontas, those were both kind of diversity movies. They were both just like, hey guys, here's some brown girls and all the wonderful things they can do. Now, in the case of Pocahontas, though, everything that the Native Americans did that was in any way interesting was what they did in relation to white people. Mm-hmm. And that could go whether it was, pro-white in the sense of like John Smith out chatting, what was the name, Kocoum?
Kocoum, yeah.
You could see it, there's, the places where it's sort of pro-white there, or even the cases where it's kind of anti-white, such as, they have at the end in their Savages songs, like, whoa, the Native Americans are calling us savages. It's okay, but what they're doing is everything that the non-whites do is in relation to white people, and the impact of it is how white people are supposed to see it with respect to our own culture.
Right.
Whereas if you see Moana, there's not a single white person in that film, and there's nothing even really implicitly white there. There's really just, here are non-whites doing, this is what Disney would say, doing interesting things in their own respect, or in the context of their own culture, without needing to reference a white person. So it is much more progressive, and it's much more successful in that sense, and that's why, like, I think it must have been frustrating for Pocahontas to make their diversity movie and then get criticized by all these non-whites for, like, bastardizing the concept.
Right.
in Moana, they succeed at it, but again, like, I'm white and I don't want to see that.
It feels very alien. It feels like we don't have a frame of reference to it. It's kind of, though, Moana does have an interesting point to it. There's that scene where she like is on the ship and then she sees that vision of her ancestors like sailing around colonizing the islands and everything. Like there was a certain, maybe there is something we can take from Moana, like that idea of your ancestors achieved these great things, but your people have been kind of, I don't know, like brought down and emasculated and demoralized. And
I half agree, because yes, I mean, we can take this sort of example, but I think that a lot of, I don't know, I really think that the idea of like, here's what other races say about themselves, shouldn't whites say that? I mean, enough of it's true that I can go with it, but I'm kind of sick of having to kind of take the lead or take these brown people messages and then reappropriate them to us. Like, I don't want to think, let's think we're cool because these like Hawaiians thought they were cool. I want to say, let's think we're cool because something related to white people.
But here's a question: do you think the Hawaiians take like an identitarian pride in their ancestors sailing between these islands and settling them, like in the same way that white people would, or was that?
I'm not gonna lie. The only thing that I know about the Hawaiians is like Tito from Rocket Power. That's like literally the far extent of my knowledge.
Well, because I almost wonder, like for them, maybe it was just this sort of base level instinct to survive. Like they depleted the resources on one island because they ate all the coconuts because they were high time preference, and they have to go sail to another island and eat the coconuts there. Like maybe it wasn't this what is it, like this Faustian spirit to go colonize the world. Maybe it was just this like.
Well, they never even in the context of Moana, they never colonized anything. They just took over uninhabited island after uninhabited island. And as far as I know, they didn't even create like an empire across all of these uninhabited islands. Like they all moved as a people from one to the other for some reason.
Right. It was just kind of like the same sort of like nomadic hunter-gatherer dynamic that you saw in Africa, except it was across the seas as opposed to across land. But I mean, they're still presented in the same way that white people had the colonization ethos of we're going to like spread our people across the world, and it's this big, bold, grand thing. That's the way the song sort of presented it. And
that's the way the song presents it. But I feel like it's kind of coming from a different perspective, because the songs in Moana, okay, when they talk about brown people and their ancestors doing all this cool, interesting stuff, it's not like with white people talking about our ancestors doing this cool and interesting stuff. Because when we talk about our ancestors doing this cool, interesting stuff, not only is it extremely true, but it's also sort of against the grain of society in this like radical, dissident way of like, you guys, it's okay to be white. When they do it, it's like because white people don't have the heart to tell them that their ancestors actually didn't do any interesting stuff, and so it's progressive to kind of make it out like they did some epic sailing with great animation and some music and whatever. Like with them, it's kind of like patronizing, pretending like you guys were here too. With us, it's like rebelling against the state of society to tell the truth, not only about the world, but about our ancestors. With us, it's truth. With us, it's an uncomfortable truth, and with them, it's a comforting lie.
Right. So what are our thoughts on the music of Moana? Like I said, I really do enjoy the Rock song. I do think, say what you will about the Rock, he does have a sort of charisma that I do appreciate.
He has a charisma. I don't want him in the ethno state, but I'll appreciate media from whatever country we send him to.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Specifically the media with him in it.
Right, yeah, I think we can do that. Other than that, though, I don't think anything really jumps out. I really hate Moana's like set piece song.
Which one is that?
Come find.
Oh, that's such a dude. I really feel like when I heard that song, I really felt like I was hearing some kind of top 40 pop song.
Yeah, it's a very like generic brown girl song.
And like all top 40 pop songs, it's so brown coding.
Yeah.
I think it was written by a white guy though, right?
Oh well, it's written by Mystery Meat 56%er. Lin-Manuel Miranda. He was the guy who did the Hamilton musical, which is it basically takes all the founding fathers and they're like, ooga booga, let's write the Constitution. Then it makes them all black. So very insulting to our heritage. Oh, by the way, does Moana like remind you of Emma Gonzalez at all? I don't know. I just
actually yes. Like whenever I hear that song, that is exactly the song Emma Gonzalez would sing.
It could be about like her singing about gun control or something.
No, I mean, really, like it's a very brown song. I mean, I encourage everybody to go type into YouTube like whatever it's called, Moana song. it will come up and
Yeah.
you'll hear it. Like, I mean, I don't know. You saying this, it's kind of like it's something I don't think I'll be able to unsee, except for the fact that I was never going to see that song again, because it's
Right.
terrible and no one should watch it other than our viewers. So I just
Right.
told to go watch it.
Right.
But yeah, no, it is just like a quintessentially brown song that is supposed to just appeal to brown, mostly even brown women. But you know.
Yeah. There's nothing. It's supposed to be a song about like, I don't know, like mastering your environment and like, achieving all these lofty goals. But
Well, I never liked brown people goals because brown people goals, the ultimate brown people goal is not mastery of the world. I mean, sure, it's a song about mastering something, but the sort of like set quintessential brown people goal is self-esteem. And I think you can kind of see it in that movie, not because the authors intended it to, but it's just kind of in the mold of what non-whites, well, okay, what brown people are thinking. Because a lot of their sort of self-esteem or a lot of their accomplishments or so on are given because white people have programs like welfare or affirmative action or diversity hiring or whatever. And if you look, like, why does Moana succeed? I mean, Hercules succeeded because he had either massive strength at the beginning of the movie, or after he gave that up, he had, wit and virtue,
willpower.
he had willpower and virtue. If you look at Moana, like, why did she succeed? Well, number one, she succeeded because the ocean wanted her to succeed for some reason. She also succeeded because she happened to be partnering with, like, a demigod
yeah.
who wanted her to succeed for some reason. I mean, there is all of this kind, like I think Deus Machina kind of takes a different role in the brown people accomplishment sphere than it would for white people. I mean, if you have Hercules succeed only because Zeus wanted him to, that would be kind of ridiculous. In fact, if I recall from Hercules, Zeus was rooting for him. He wanted him to succeed, but he never actually did anything.
Also, Hercules was like kind of a klutz at the beginning of the movie, and despite having massive strength, he had no dexterity, he had no control over his strength. He had to have a whole montage dedicated to learning how to control his...
Yeah, he had to be the guy who could, lift several tons and move those poles, and then, he still had to go lift like 400-pound dumbbells in order to
Right.
get to where he was.
Right, yeah. Like, he still had to put in a lot of hard work. There wasn't this... it's kind of funny using the term cargo cult, given its origin, but that's really what Moana is. Like, success is sort of cargo culted. It's something that... It's something that is kind of given to
you
her
by these random sources for no reason, and
Right.
and it's kind of fitting at the end. Like, she's successful because she looks like the volcano demon. I mean, in reality, if Moana came to America, she would be very successful because
Right.
she looks a certain way.
Exactly, right. Whereas Hercules would be successful because he earns it. So now let's discuss the 90s Disney films, because I think there are a lot of genuine red pill gems there. First and foremost in my mind is Lion King. I think that, it's kind of funny, the setting of Lion King is almost like implicitly white nationalist, or I don't know, maybe you could say colonialist. It has this sort of setting.
It has a strong understanding of group dynamics.
Right, and you have this implicit sort of racial caste system in the background, like the lion eats the antelope, but the antelope eats the grass, and the lion becomes the grass.
Also, just the lions are in charge, and therefore things work out, and the hyenas are not in charge, and things go really badly when the hyenas are. And Scar is a bad guy not only because he, kills Mufasa and all that, but specifically because he sides with the hyenas.
He lets the hyenas in.
His in-group isn't the Lions of Pride Rock, who I'm also going to say I really liked the aesthetic at the end where there were like 20 lions and like 500 hyenas.
Yeah.
But we all knew who was going to win that fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the peace and prosperity of the Pride Lands is contingent upon them keeping the hyenas out and the lions being in charge and the lions ruling with virtue and
they were kind of shameless about that.
Yeah.
They didn't feel some need to make it as if hyenas had any real strength other than their numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, just, I don't know if anyone...
You had no based hippos like among the lions too, just like the lions among themselves ruling and everyone else kind of did what they said. And
moreover, if anybody knows anything about hyenas, actually I only know about spotted hyenas, I don't know about other hyena types, if there even are any, but lions are just objectively superior in every single way.
Right. Female hyenas are traps.
Yeah, and male hyenas are pretty effeminate and pathetic, to be quite honest.
Yeah, so no, that the Lion King was very red pilled on the hyena question. Also very red pilled on gender. I mean, consider it really took a man coming back and being in charge to save everyone, save everything. I mean, I don't know if Simba himself really individually like tilted the scales against the hyenas to such an extent that the female lions couldn't have just overthrown Scar and the hyenas hypothetically if they wanted to, but
They had the sort of natural male thrust to do so.
right. And there's also a strong statement in favor of sort of disavowing this modernist, if it feels good, do it, and instead, follow your duties and obligations. Simba spends his adolescence with Timon and Pumbaa, and they're basically like MGTOWs. They just kind of like Hakuna Matata is essentially like the MGTOW anthem. It's just
I don't know. I think MGTOWs worry a lot and have very little fun.
Yeah, well, Timon and Pumbaa are what MGTOWs wish they were. But, I mean, if you think about it, at the beginning of Can You Feel the Love Tonight, Timon and Pumbaa are, like, upset that Simba's getting into a relationship with a girl. And
Simba finds a girl and immediately abandons MGTOW.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. They're upset that their little dynamic is going to get destroyed because Simba's actually going to follow his responsibilities and find a good woman and do all that. And they're distraught over it, which I think is... I don't know. It's a powerful statement, but yeah, no, it's in favor of following your duties and obligations, and then there's also a sense of lineage, a sense of ancestry. I mean, when Simba speaks to Mufasa early in the movie, when they're looking at the stars, and then later in the movie when he's kind of looking into the puddle and he sees the reflection of his father. These are
everything Simba and Mufasa had to say to one another, after Mufasa's death. It's almost so on point and just obviously brilliant that I feel almost like I have nothing to add to it. It's just something that I wish every white nationalist could hear, or every white person could hear, told to them in Latin by some Roman.
The idea of fulfilling your ancestors' goals for the world and like living in accordance with their wishes, and there's something very primally powerful about that. And I don't think a modern Disney movie would have a dynamic like that. No,
none of them have had any dynamic on that. They've been absolutely terrible. And if anybody else still has any faith that Disney will be anything other than terrible going forward, just Google for Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet trailer and just see how much of it you can get through.
Yeah, that was a pretty big black pill when I saw that in theaters, I have to say. That said, I do think Disney has some fantastic roots as a company. Especially if you look at the life of Walt Disney, if you look at his personal business practices, everything he sought to achieve. I don't know. I mean, there is part of me that has hope for the brand, and I would hope that in the ethno state we get to maintain something of that, because I do think there's a lot of value there, especially in the older films that they made.
Well, I would kind of like to know, to what extent does the brand exist, or have they just been demographically displaced by shitlibs?
Well, consider the fact that, I don't know, like Frozen was much more popular than the other films, and you know what? Frozen has inspired a lot of young girls to get into the whole like Nordic aesthetic and want to dress like Norwegian princesses. So, I think that's good and healthy and pro-European. And
well, it's true, but how would Frozen have... Well, a few things. Number one, as much as Frozen it was a popular movie a few years ago, but, did it have, in the moment or in time afterwards, the same kind of cultural impact that, like, Cinderella might have? I wonder if that's true. I bet that even a month after it came out, Cinderella was more culturally important than Frozen.
No, I would definitely concur with that, but at the same time, I think to the extent that it shapes the modern standards of femininity in the West, and it shapes the aesthetic that young girls are going for, I think it was a good pro-white thing that it is going to have implications, just aesthetic implications, like long after it ceases to have like artistic relevance.
I don't know. I think that with Frozen, it was kind of afraid to make a statement. I don't think that Frozen was shaping femininity or, aesthetics. I think that it was shaped by current aesthetics. And to some extent, I do wonder... I guess I do like the fact that it presented that Nordic aesthetic. But I do wonder to what extent, for people who just aren't naturally inclined to the Moana aesthetic, if we can call it that.
Yeah.
I wonder to what extent it just gave those people an outlet to, to go do the I don't need no man thing, but dress it up in Nordicism.
Well, I suppose that's possible, but at the same time, I just can't think of any work that has had the same cultural impact as Frozen that presented I guess, traditional European aesthetics and architecture and ways of dress and mannerisms and everything like that in such an appealing way that had such an impact on the younger generation as Frozen. I think it was sort of unique in that regard.
Well, one thing I kind of wonder about with Frozen is, did it actually present the Nordic aesthetic, or was that Nordic aesthetic of like pretty blonde princesses just already there in our culture, just already doing its thing? And Frozen just gave people, or I guess gave, whoever watches that movie, if people just gave them license to, to now go be paused and do sort of a mild feminist thing. I mean, Frozen, I don't think actually burnt any new ground or presented any new phenomenon to any new audience, or to any old audience for that matter. I think that Frozen was, it was something somebody could enjoy in a theater, and they could be annoyed when their young daughter plays the songs over and over and over and over and over again. But I think that's as far as the cultural impact goes, and insofar as it's remembered for anything sort of lasting or, quote unquote daring or whatever. I think all people really remember it for is that neither Elsa or Anna found a husband at the end of the film.
Well, what I will say is that I remember growing up throughout the early 2000s, it seemed like a lot of the prominent female characters were tomboys. They didn't really dress in a feminine manner. Like the whole princess thing, it really just disappeared for a while. You had like Princess Fiona in Shrek, who was like a subversion of the princess thing. She started out as a pretty feminine princess, and then she just turned into an ogre, and then that was her character throughout the rest of the series. Other than that, I mean, I can't think of any like prominent like princesses. I mean, the ideal female character was like Kim Possible during this period, right? Like she had to be like beating guys up, and so I feel like Elsa and Anna, and then Rapunzel to a lesser extent, kind of brought back that just traditionally feminine, wears dresses, does girly things, and made girls kind of want to be that again. You see girls having like Elsa on their lunchbox nowadays, not like Kim Possible, and I do think that's a move in a positive direction. Now, you could also say that this is just in response to market forces. I think that in terms of like selling merch, it's not as profitable to have a tomboy be your main female character as it is a traditionally feminine princess. I think that the little girls aren't going to buy the Kim Possible outfit as much as the Elsa outfit due to biological reasons.
I've actually seen on Reddit a lot that Kim Possible and basically every female character in it has become an iconic figure for lesbians on Reddit.
Are you serious?
Yeah, that's a thing.
What?
But one thing though that I would point out, I mean, I don't know, I don't hold the princess aesthetic as in any way sacred, or honestly, I don't even think that's such a good aesthetic. Let's not talk about that right now. I know you disagree, but I think that, I don't know, I look harder at just how they present, masculinity and femininity, and the character who I think is kind of the quintessential Disney tomboy is obviously Mulan. And even though she was not only in no way, shape, or form a princess, but she didn't dress especially feminine, they did actually present her as a feminine icon, because this thing she was doing was completely reluctant and she wanted no actual part of it. And the only reason why she didn't just go to the matchmaker and go be matchmade was because she was completely incompetent at it. I mean, at the core of it, it wasn't really advocating that women go be soldiers or anything like that. It really was just like 90-year-old men perhaps shouldn't be soldiers.
Well, yeah, I mean, Mulan wasn't masculine in any way. She was, like, clumsy.
Well, I mean, I guess technically they drew her as a good soldier, but that was, I don't know.
It was like a forced plot point, but
yeah, it wasn't in line with her character, and actually it was a weak plot point. Actually, I think it would have been like better and funnier if they made her completely incompetent, but good enough to maybe not be discovered.
Yeah. Now, another interesting thing about Mulan, despite it sort of being Disney's Asian movie, the very few characters in the movie actually act authentically Asian, especially the primary characters.
They had that one guy who does.
Yeah, you have that one guy, that like bureaucrat who follows the army around, who's like, the emperor does not approve of your behavior. But other than that, most of the primary characters, I guess the father sort of acts kind of Asian, but like Mulan acts very white. She's like the independent '90s Western woman, and then the captain of the military, I forget his name, was like Sean or Shao.
Something Asian.
Chow, yeah, some Asian name. The guy Li Shang, that was his name, Li Shang. He's very white presenting too. I mean, he doesn't act like the stereotypical like Asian military officer. He's not.
No, they wanted to make him seem masculine, so they had to make him seem white.
Right, exactly. So the primary characters are all very white presenting. So we can kind of draw an interesting contrast from Moana, because the characters in Moana do act very non-white, and it's kind of about them doing their own non-white thing. Whereas in Mulan,
Yeah. In Moana, it's kind of about showing like brown people have cool ancestors and are great in their own right, and in Mulan, it's kind of like non-whites can be white too. It is a very big shift in paradigm that's come over the last 20 years or so.
yeah, it's funny. I think the sort of mainstream alt-right narrative would say that the pause had already set in the 90s, but I remember there were a lot of things that they sort of got away with in, especially cartoons in the 90s, that you definitely couldn't get away with today. Like, do you remember Tito from Rocket Power?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nowadays he'd be considered like a very offensive racial stereotype. I mean, especially when he goes into, as the ancient Hawaiians used to say, brother. I mean, like...
Well, here's kind of the thing, right? I think that you can, if you look at the entire history, or at least from now, since white people started taking it seriously, of race relations in the U.S. I mean, it was kind of sold to white people on this premise that we didn't actually know what we were really getting. I mean, we kind of thought, like in the 1960s, people thought maybe that only the very high quality blacks would join our society. The rest would be kind of not really forced to be included in our businesses, and that they would stick to themselves and not try and like race mix or anything. In the 90s, we kind of thought that we could at least keep our racial paradigm of effectively seeing everything from a white person's perspective, and that non-whites would either just be white people with, to use the liberal term, with a different skin color, or they would be mostly excluded and not really talked about. I mean, as time has gone on, and I think as we've kind of moved into more contemporary times, we sort of learned that if these people are going to be here, they're going to be themselves, and they're going to continue their own racial narrative and their own racial perspective in their own right without paying respect to white people for it. I mean, they are their own thing, and they kind of exist independently of us. And that just creates this much uglier aesthetic. That's kind of why, despite them all being Asian, why we can enjoy ancient Hawaiians or ancient Chinese, whereas I just can't enjoy the Moana paradigm at all.
Exactly. Well, I think we've said enough about Disney. Why don't we go ahead and wrap this up, kind of talk about our plans for this podcast. So I think we were thinking, somewhere between 1 and 2 hours, twice a week. I want to try to make it parodies as often as I can. Hopefully include them in as many episodes as I can, but I can't promise it'll always happen. This isn't going to be so much of a current event show. I think the Alt-Right already has a million of those. It's mostly going to be like a topical discussion show where we'll spontaneously discuss things as they come up, but we'll probably kind of come in with an idea we kind of want to shoot the shit on and see what happens. I'm kind of considering the idea of introducing like skits or sketches or something like that. I don't know. I have a lot of ideas, but we're gonna see how they pan out. First few episodes will probably be somewhat experimental, but I would like to thank you all for taking the time to watch our first podcast. It was a great honor to speak to you tonight, and I'd like to thank Walt's roommate for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, have a great evening and take care.